From the Oregon State University Extension Service, this is Pollination, a podcast that tells the stories of researchers, land managers, and concerned citizens making bold strides to improve the health of pollinators. I'm your host, Dr. Adoni Melathopoulos, Assistant Professor in Pollinator Health in the Department of Horticulture.
Man, the Pacific Northwest, folks, is becoming this pollinator health superpower in the United States. Some of you I'm going to try and get Karen Wright on the podcast soon. Washington State Department just hired on a taxonomist who's going to lead up the Washington State Bee Atlas. But really super exciting is a new extension position. Kelly Kulhanek is the Assistant Professor of Pollinator Research and Extension. She's going to be my guest today. Dr. Kulhanek has been in Washington. Many of you know she's been with the WSU Bee program where she was doing postdoctoral work starting in 2020, but she's got this new role. And we're going to hear in this episode her background, which is extensive. She's worked with so many different people, coast to coast, honeybees, wild bees, truly impressive. And she's going to tell us a little bit about her short-term vision, what she wants to get done in the next year, as well as where the pollinator research and extension program at WSU might go in the future. So this week on Pollination, exciting times in the Pacific Northwest, as I'm joined by Dr. Kelly Kulhanek. And action. Well, welcome to Pollination.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you very much. Happy to be here.
Well, we're so happy that you're here in the Pacific Northwest. This is really great. I think before we get into your new position and what you're doing, which everybody is curious about, tell us about your background in bees. Maybe even start with what was your first experience working with bees?
Sure. So my very first experience working with bees was as an undergraduate. So I did my undergrad at UC Berkeley in sort of the Bay Area in California. I'm originally from San Diego, so I'm kind of born and raised in California. And while I was at Berkeley, I was sort of getting a general biology degree and was interested in research. And I took like a little 2-credit class on urban gardening. And it was super interesting. And in that class, we learned about the importance of pollination for gardens. And that was like my first even thought about pollination and how it's important, like for us as humans. And I thought that was really cool. So when it came time to get some more research experience, I applied to a pollination lab. And it was Dr. Claire Kremen's lab at UC Berkeley. And I worked for a graduate student there by the name of Lauren Ponicio, who is now in Oregon. Wow. Yes. Who is now in Oregon. And she was really a great mentor to me when she was a graduate student. And I was just a, youngling undergrad. And her research at the time was looking at sort of pollination diversity in Yosemite National Park in response to wildfire. And so these, summer field seasons were in Yosemite National Park, like backpacking through the wilderness, sampling bees and, keeping track of what plants they were visiting. And during the semesters, it was sorting through all these amazing, beautiful specimens that she had brought back. And it was just like really the best experience. And I loved it so much. And then, when it came time to graduate and to move on, I knew I probably was going to need some more research experience and was already thinking about grad school. So I applied to a position with the U.S. Geological Survey in North Dakota. And that was working with Clint Otto's group up there, doing entirely honeybee work. So that was like big commercial honeybee pollination, sort of in the honey basket of the United States. So really, and intensive ag areas. So like totally different from what I had done as an undergrad. And
I'd say,
yeah. And it just kind of struck me like, wow, these are both, pollination related. And isn't it so interesting how wide of a range of needs we get met by these little animal pollinators? And so that was my first experience with honeybees, my first time seeing a honeybee colony, and I was just blown away. I thought it was the coolest thing ever. I was totally hooked. And I also really liked that there's sort of a human element as well. You know, when you work with honeybees, you get to work with beekeepers also. And I really liked sort of that intersection between people and these really cool little social insects and agriculture. So I decided I wanted to do grad school in sort of the honeybee realm. And then I went to University of Maryland to get my PhD. And so that was with Dr. Dennis Van Engelsdorp and his group out there, and sort of the Bee Informed Partnership. And that just ended up being another really great experience where I got to make all these amazing connections with all these different researchers all over the country. And I had a lot of opportunity to work with beekeepers, and I studied, you know, beekeeping management practices and varroa treatments, and sort of worked with this citizen science program with all these beekeepers all over the place. And, you know, it was really the best experience, and kind of led me eventually here to Washington State, where I started as a postdoc in 2020 and sort of have continued on doing beekeeping management practice work. And then finally, in June of last year, I got my assistant professorship position here. So now I am an assistant professor of pollinator research and extension here at Washington State. And, I think we'll talk more about my program in a little bit, but really excited to be here in the Pacific Northwest and serving the stakeholders in this area.
Well, we are so excited to have you up here. I think, I remember when I started here in a similar charge in pollinator health, having this kind of broad charge of kind of, extension programming that may not necessarily just apply to apiculture. And you certainly have the breadth of experience. I also think it's wonderful that two of your past mentors have also come to the Pacific Northwest. Dr. Panicio and Dr. Kremen are both up here now. So this is great. This is a really wonderful trajectory. And the wonderful thing as well is you've been in Washington. So, you've gotten a sense of the landscape in Washington. And, it has some of the largest pollination needs in the U.S. California is the big one. But when you come to Washington, it's a big in all sorts of ways, big in terms of honeybees. I think about, colonies that are headed your way right now.
Yes.
But also in terms of non-apis pollinators, it's like a very big area. Give our listeners who aren't from Washington a kind of paintbrush of like why Washington is this really kind of this bee mecca.
Yeah, it's been so great and so fascinating to get to know sort of the agricultural landscape here in Washington. And, coming from doing my PhD in Maryland, and that's kind of where the majority of my bee experience took place, that's a small state. And, there was a good amount of agriculture in Maryland, but just on a smaller scale, and beekeeping too on a smaller scale, not a lot of huge commercial migratory beekeeping operations based in Maryland. So, that's one of the reasons I wanted to come to Washington State, is to sort of get this experience, with these huge beekeeping operations and also this larger scale agriculture. And Washington has been super interesting. So the agricultural landscape in Washington is pretty diverse, and we have lots of different tree fruit crops, specialty crops, and many of those are bee pollinated. And so, if you think about, and a lot of this information's on the WSDA website, so they have all these great graphics if people are interested. But if you think of some of the top 10 things that Washington produces, apples is sort of our number one product, and that is bee pollinated. We also have cherries, blueberries, pears, apricots, raspberries, all of these things that are really huge products in Washington, and that Washington is sort of a top producer of in the country, are animal pollinated, and more specifically bee pollinated. And then, we also have sort of smaller crops that I don't even think people think about as much, but are also really important. All these vegetable seeds, carrot and onion seed. So really just a huge variety of needs and situations in which bees are being used in this state. And, honeybees are the most prevalent pollinator in agricultural systems. Our state is home to about 100,000 colonies, but many, many more than that are brought into the state to sort of meet the pollination demands of these crops. And so it is a very pollination dependent state. And, you mentioned non-apis bees. We also have other crops that are better pollinated or benefit from pollination in addition to honeybees by other bees. So some examples of that are things like alfalfa seed production. The alfalfa leafcutter bee is better at pollinating alfalfa seed than honeybees. And if you think about, what alfalfa is used for, that feeds back into the cattle industry, the dairy industry. So, really even a larger scale than just the straightforward crops that we directly eat. Other parts of our food chain are sort of reliant on this as well. Blue orchard mason bees are used for other things as well, lots of tree fruit. And we have those produced in this state, and people like to keep those at home as a hobby too. Lots of just different things going on with pollination. And I'm, still sort of getting to know a lot of these things and meeting a lot of people who do a lot of these different things. And that's been really fun for me to sort of see all these different situations. And then, sorry, go ahead.
No, that's good. Keep going. I just wanted to know, maybe I'll quickly butt in. I was going to say that I recently learned that when it comes to blue orchard bees, Washington and Oregon are we export them. We make them in large numbers here, and then they kind of like go to California. This is a really productive place for them as well.
Yeah. Super interesting. I had not really come into contact much with blue orchard bees before coming here. So that's been a really cool new experience for me. And then, I was just going to mention sort of like the hobbyist aspect of beekeeping in this state too. A lot of our stakeholders are these big commercial beekeepers, but are also smaller scale beekeepers. There's a lot of interest in sort of this hobby or backyard beekeeping in urban areas in Washington. The Washington State Beekeepers Association is super active, and there's lots of local beekeeping organizations too. So getting to know all those folks has been really fun. And master gardeners too, right? They are super active in this state as well. Huge master gardener programs really focused on creating bee habitat and making sure there's, nesting sites available for non-apis bees, for native bees. It's really just been, the more I'm in this position, the more I get to know just different types of people, all who care so much about pollinator health in this state. So I think, the structure is really in place for my job to be relatively easy, because there's already so many people here who want to help and who want to do so much good. And it's just a really exciting time, I think, for Washington.
So you've got this huge charge just in people interested. I think about master gardeners or backyard beekeepers. You have them from Spokane to Olympia, Bellingham, Tri-Cities area. Of course, there's Seattle. I mean, that's a huge area. And if I understood correctly, this position is kind of nicely centrally located in the center of it all. Tell us a little bit about where you're located, and then I want to ask you about the position.
Yeah. Okay. Great question. So I'm currently located in Pullman, Washington. And for those who aren't familiar with the state of Washington, Pullman is about 6 miles from Idaho. So we are way, way on the eastern side of the state. So not a lot of easy access to most of those areas you just mentioned, and kind of a little bit isolated out here. We're in Whitman County. For those who don't know, Whitman County is like the nation's leading wheat producing county. So, not a lot going on here for bees. Most of the honey we make in Pullman is canola honey. And that's pretty much like our main honey producing crop out here. So not necessarily the best, most centrally located area for, an extension position where I need to be interacting with people from all over the state. So my new position is actually based out of our brand new special beekeeping and pollinator research and extension facility in Othello, Washington. And so that is kind of much more centrally located in the state of Washington. It's kind of in South Central Washington. And so, a lot easier access to people from the east side of Washington, but also from the west side. Easier access for me to sort of get to all those different places. We've had that facility in the bee program since March of 2020. The opening event for that facility was the last public event that WSU held before COVID.
Oh dear.
So getting it up and running, has been a little bit slow because of the pandemic. But I think, with my new position in place and being located in that facility, I think we should really sort of hit the ground running now and get everything up and running and, hold in-person events there. And I think it has a lot of potential, and we really can't wait to see what becomes of it.
So exciting. I can just imagine beekeepers just kind of like taking a little detour off the interstate and popping up to Othello to see what's new.
Yes. Well, please stop by, everybody. Come swing by. We'll have like handouts and pamphlets and all sorts of goodies for people to grab when they come by.
Well, let's talk about the ground that you're going to be running on, because it is extensive. What is the focus of the position at WSU? And if you're starting a position, I've often had people who just kind of come into new positions. What is your short-term goal? Like, what do you see, needing to get done over the next year, and kind of your longer horizon of what you'd like the program to become?
Yeah, great question. So, my official title is Assistant Professor of Pollinator Research and Extension. So that is pretty broad, right? There's lots of different directions I think people could go. Most of my background is, with honeybee management research. And so I have a couple short-term goals around, doing research on best beekeeping management practices, making sure that those studies are very specifically tailored for Washington beekeepers and for Pacific Northwest beekeepers. I think there's room to improve some of our really generalized recommendations and make them very specifically tailored for our climate and our phenology of, our seasons and things like that. So that's one of my short-term goals. And then a lot of our short-term goals are centered around education and more of the extension component. And so one of the things I'm super excited about, and I think will be a big focus of my first year, is the Washington State Master Beekeeper Program. And the Master Beekeeper Program in this state has been relatively quiet for the last few years. But the Washington State Beekeepers Association has approached us to partner with them to sort of develop this brand new Master Beekeeper course. And so our goal is to have this developed by the end of this year, so people could start taking it in 2024. And yeah, I'm really excited about it. And so is, the Washington State Beekeepers Association. I think Oregon has a really fantastic Master Beekeeper program, and a lot of Washington beekeepers have been going through that program. And we just really want to develop something in-house in Washington to, again, make sure that our master beekeepers are getting the most up-to-date, specific Washington-related information that they can, so that they can sort of go forth and train other beekeepers and the public and other stakeholders, with really sound, data-based scientific information. So I'm super excited about that. I think it's going to be really fun and a lot of work, but very rewarding. So I can't wait.
Well, those are really ambitious kind of short-term goals. And I think if I heard you right, the launch for the Master Beekeeping Program will be 2024. So this is going to be, a lot on your plate on the front end. Where do you see this position? Now that I was thinking how I would have answered that question when I first arrived here. In some sense, I had to get a lay of the land a little bit more before I knew how the program would be structured. But from this standpoint, we'll come back. We'll ask you again. but where you stand right now, where do you kind of see the kind of way that the program needs to expand? Because it does sound like this very short-term, urgent need to be able to get new beekeepers up to speed and to understand some of the practices that they would require in order to be able to be more successful. But what's the long-term goal?
Yeah. So I think, my biggest long-term goal is to identify how to best serve stakeholders besides honey beekeepers. So that's sort of my comfort zone and where, my wheelhouse. And I think there's a lot of room to learn from and talk to and get to know other types of stakeholders in Washington state. So, I'm thinking of growers of crops who are dependent on bee pollination. I'm thinking of master gardeners. I'm thinking of the general public. And I think a lot of communication is going to need to happen for me to best understand how to serve them. So it's a little bit open-ended, I think. And I want to make sure I leave room in my position to sort of go where the stakeholder need is and to adapt to, different kinds of challenges in these different areas. So it is a little bit open-ended right now. And I'm really excited to see where it goes and to sort of make more connections and have more conversations with people. And I think, another kind of area that'll be a big focus is this idea of sort of integrated pest and pollinator management. And this is another long-term goal of the program. I think there's a good need because we have so many different crops in Washington, and, just the general public using different pesticides and things like that. I think there's a good need for us to understand how we can use pesticides and how we can develop cropping systems and also gardens and just natural spaces in ways that really support pollinator health and give us, healthy plants and good control of pests and things like that. So this idea of sort of integrated pest and pollinator management for, all these different groups of stakeholders, I think is another sort of long-term goal that I'm hoping will kind of take shape as I have more conversations with people.
It is daunting. I know. I almost think in some ways Oregon's a mini version of Washington. We have tree fruits, but we don't have the tree fruits that you have. We've got our blueberry industries are comparable, but you have this huge blueberry industry on the east side that we don't have. It is kind of like daunting to think of which one of these to tackle, but I guess it also opens so many huge opportunities. And I hope that parking lot Othello is large, because I'm sure people are going to be dropping in and before long and knocking on your door repeatedly.
Yeah, I guess I'll just put it out there here. If any stakeholders are listening, if a blueberry grower is listening and saying, oh, this woman hasn't contacted me to see how she can help, please reach out. I would love to talk to you.
Well, let's take a quick break. I'm really curious how you're going to answer this. We have this segment we do with our guests, so we'll be right back after a little bit of music. Okay, we are back. So we have these 3 questions we ask our guests. I'm so curious what your answers are, and the first one is, most people know, do you have a book recommendation for our listeners?
Yes. Okay. So I do have a couple book recommendations, and they're both from a woman named Hillary Kearney. And she has a great sort of business and Instagram profile called Girl Next Door Honey. And I love a woman in beekeeping, and she has all sorts of cool videos and really cool resources and fun, like little games and stuff on her website. But she has 2 books that I think are really cool. And one of them is totally honeybee focused. It's called Queen Spotting. And it's all about, the honeybee queen, but then there's also these little puzzles where she's got these great photos of frames of bees with a queen hidden on there. And it's like a Where's Waldo for the queen. So kind of a fun little game also. And then she also has the Little Book of Bees, which is more generally about other kinds of bees, not just honeybees. So, and she does like all her own illustrations and stuff, and the artwork's really cool. So I think those are both really great.
One more time. What is her name?
Hillary Kearney, Kearny.
Fantastic. Okay, great. Well, I'm going to start following her on Instagram. That's wonderful.
Yeah. Yeah. She's in San Diego, which is where I'm from. So love that too.
Oh, cool. Even better.
Yeah.
Well, the next question is for all the work that you do. You've worked with native bees. You worked with Bee Informed Project or Citizen Science. You've worked with so many things. Do you have a go-to tool for all of your kind of needs?
Yes. So my favorite tool is my camera phone. And so, I think it's really useful for beekeeping, but also, for just other types of bees. You see, you're out in your garden, you see a bee land on your flowers and you can take a cool picture with your camera phone. I think, we're so lucky to have camera phones that have such great cameras these days. And they really, you really don't need any special equipment to take good photos. I mean, you can get like a little macro lens that you put on your phone and it will actually help you take better bee photos. But I use my camera phone constantly, especially for beekeeping too. It's hard to remember to like bring a pen and paper to take
Isn't
notes.
it so? Mm-hmm.
So you can take pictures. I take pictures of things all the time and it helps me remember, I take a picture of like the hive tag number and it helps me remember what's going on in which colony if I don't have time to take a note, or you can just open your notes app and jot something down on there too. So yeah, I think
there's something about that. Like I did this recently because I was like, what's the latest blueberry has bloomed here? Because, it's this cold year. So I just kind of like scroll through the years in April, May, and it's like I could get, there's my first buds. And I just it just becomes this index of kind of a little encyclopedia. It's not just, I need a picture for a talk. It's kind of like, when did this happen? I love the idea of using your phone your phone pictures as a kind of notepad.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. And it's amazing how much you forget. So it's really nice to have a visual record of things to go back and look for sure.
Okay. Well, that brings us to our last question. Do you have a favorite pollinator species, and tell us a little bit about why?
Sure. So, I think my favorite pollinator species is the European honeybee. I know that's boring, but, I wouldn't be here without them. That was really the first pollinator experience I had that was really mind blowing to me, to see inside a honeybee hive and like be so amazed by their social behavior and how complex it is. And I remember like my supervisor pointing out a waggle dance to me and describing what that was. And I was just like, what? Like, that is so amazing. So, I think that's my favorite, but I did pick another one as well. And it's the rusty patch bumblebee. I think a fan favorite. And we love the rusty patch bumblebee. My husband and I have a running joke where every time we see a bumblebee with any orange on it, he's like, oh, look, there's a rusty patch. I'm like, I don't think so. I really don't think so. But it's sort of a running joke we have. And so, kind of brings a smile to your face. So yeah, those are my two favorites.
Well, I realized that your former Dr. Van Egelstorp is also from the Pacific Northwest. I think he's from Vancouver originally.
Yes, correct.
So you're truly, this is like, you were meant to be here. It
was destiny. We've all come full circle all over the country, back to the Pacific Northwest.
I do remember talking with Dennis years ago that, I also love the honeybee as my favorite species. It always has been because of the people part that you brought up earlier. You could go to any continent, and even if you don't know the language, you can still communicate with most of the world, because everybody, the whole planet has kept bees. And I love that love going to a bee club, and I love sitting down with commercial beekeepers in their kitchen. It's really an amazing feeling.
Yeah, that's a great point. Beekeeping is such like a unifier, right? Like you can have such diverse opinions or backgrounds or come from, totally different places in the world, but everybody has had, if you've opened a honeybee colony, that's like such a distinct shared experience that you can relate to someone. So it is really special. And, I think through the past however many years I've been doing this, that's been my favorite part, is just getting to know so many people, going to beekeeping meetings and having people welcome you into their home and cook meals for you and offer you to stay the night in their house. I mean, it's just such a special community. And yeah, I think, that's why I'm so hooked and want to keep doing this forever, because the people part is so special.
Well, we, on behalf of the listeners in the Pacific Northwest, we're so excited that you're here. You're in the position. We're all looking forward to your program developing and flourishing and having you back on the show many, many, many times.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm super excited to be here. Super excited to be helping. And yeah, I can't wait.
Thank you so much for listening. The show is produced by Quinn Sin and Neal, who's a student here at OSU in the New Media Communications program, and the show wouldn't even be possible without the support of the Oregon Legislature, the Foundation for Food and Agricultural Research, and Western SARE. Show notes with links mentioned on each episode are available on the website, which is at pollinationpodcast.oregonstate.edu. I also love hearing from you, and there's several ways to connect with me. The first one is you can visit the website and leave an episode-specific comment. You can suggest a future guest or topic, or ask a question that could be featured in a future episode. But you can do the same things on Twitter, Instagram, or Facebook by visiting the Oregon Bee Project. Thanks so much for listening, and see you next week.